Okay, we are finally back. It's good to see you and not just hear your voice.
Absolutely, and you seem to be very pumped for our triumphant return.
I'm pumped for things in general.
Amazing.
Nailing most things. Not all things, but nailing most things.
Yes.
Now, we don't have the chalkboard, so I am going to tell myself in the future that when you're editing this, Joseph, you need to get a picture of a chalkboard with a amusing title. You have to actually think of the amusing title. But today we're going to be talking about trading card games.
Yes, the virtual and the physical, the literal and the metaphorical, the ethereal and the temporal.
The analog and the digital. Cards. I mean, anything that's physical is what has been traditionally referred to as analog, whereas anything that's on software is what's referred to as digital. I mean, I guess you don't go to a store and say, "Hey, what are your analog card games?" I understand that term doesn't come up, but they're certainly more analog than they are digital because they exist in real life as opposed to only existing as pieces of data. So, anyways, I played analog card games for pretty much my entire life, but they were, as much as they were marketed towards kids, they were really hard to get into as a kid if you didn't have money. And
well, that's going to your parents for money.
That's what I guess what they're assuming in most cases, that if you're going to get into this game, you're going to suck that money out of your parents who have the money to do it. And parents probably had enough money to buy a booster here, buy a card set there, but it was the anxiety of how many times are you going to ask me to buy a card? When is it going to be enough? When is enough going to be enough? When are you going to be happy? When are you going to have your perfect deck?
When you have Charizard.
When you have Charizard, which could take hundreds, if not thousands, of boosters before you finally see him.
Yeah, that was a very weird mechanic back in the day when the Pokemon card game was first picking up. There was one card, Charizard, and it was, I believe, the term used by the extra credits team is power creep.
Yeah, okay.
It was just so far above the curve that having this in your deck could singularly win you every game. Now, the mechanics have gotten more complicated since then, thank God. We've had some more components. You really have to understand, though, but our generation kind of were the beta testers for this kind of thing. I mean, Magic the Gathering was around for a long time, but the Pokemon trading card game was kind of an entry-level drug for a lot of people into this. And then the whole scene changed after that. Japan jumped in with Yu-Gi-Oh!, there was Duel Masters.
I would say Japan jumped in. I mean, more Japanese creators jumped in, but yeah. Pokemon did originate in Japan, so
yeah,
they do deserve the credit for that.
That was me misspeaking. I apologize. But yeah, we kind of were the bait because even back then, I can't think of a single game store that sold these cards that had binders for buying them individually. It was just, here's your pack, have a nice day.
Yeah.
And they were even located at corner stores at some point. I think even still are. If you go to Shoppers Drug Mart, you can buy Pokemon boosters.
Yeah, you can still buy boosters. And I would go to a corner store and I bought several boosters from one, and then I found out those were actually bootleg Pokemon cards. So it was you knew you had a success when people were trying to rip you off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a lot of really good memories of the Pokemon trading card game because this is when Pokemon was hitting it in every way. It was the Pokemon Red and Blue, the originals had just come out. Mm-hmm. The cartoon had everybody talking. And Pokemon in particular is such a great idea for a property because when you have 151, I guess 150 if you didn't know about Mew at the time, different kinds of Pokemon, everyone was guaranteed to find one or two that they identify with. Some might like the really cute, cuddly ones. Some might like the badass, mean-looking ones. Some even identified with like the ones influenced by a specific culture, like Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan were clearly based off Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan as like fighting characters. It was just so diverse. And then when the time came for this to be cards, holy shit, that just blow everything wide open.
And they've also had a lot of fun with that because even though they're at an insane number of Pokemon, look, I like the classics. I really do. I think they're nice. But I think once you start peaking around the 400 point, maybe the next Pokemon you release shouldn't have the classic Pokemon in it. Like if you have to make 100 new Pokemon every single game, maybe it's time to let the old 150 go, or maybe just pick the ones you like from there. Rata, Pidgey, fantastic starter Pokemon. I never get bored of finding them in the long grass.
Mm-hmm.
Why you seem to have to invent a new rat and a new bird Pokemon every single. I'm playing White 2 at the moment, and the new one, like Pidgey looks like a sparrow. Let's be honestly. The new bird Pokemon, I remember its name. It looks like an actual pigeon, including the little. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's basically one of those weird realistic feature on top of an otherwise cartoony picture thing. And look, why do you want me to catch this? Where's Pidgey? Pidgey is great. Let's evolve Pidgey into Pidgeotto. That was a good Pokemon. That won me many fights.
But it's not like there's just one species of bird, and it's not like there's only
This is a video
one
game,
kind.
not an ecosystem.
No, but they're still trying to have some semblance of logic to it. And the thing that always confused me is how come you never saw any of these new Pokemon in the original? You would think that these Pokemon would have wandered into the area, even to just be like a surprise that you didn't know anything about. This one's not even registered. That would have been cool. But those new ones only showed up in the new regions, so either they were only native to that region, which needs to be justified, or they realize they can event more. I guess I thought that just having the 150 was what they were just gonna do, you know?
I think the series really, in terms of video games, peaked for me with Gold and Silver.
Yeah.
I think that really was the high point. They had a good amount of selection there. Everything felt like it had its purpose in it, and they hadn't quite gone to the point of EV training or dual elements and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was good.
So let's put a lid on the Pokemon, not talking about the card game. Now, the card game, I remember when we were playing it, at the time when we were kids, no one knew the official way to play the game. So we just did it the way we saw the Pokemon battles in the cartoons. Or you would pull out like 6 Pokemon cards, be like, I pull out Ivysaur, and then we'd change attacks, and somebody would eventually lose. And so obviously in this situation, if somebody had Charizard, you were in some serious shit. You weren't going to win. We actually misread Porygon, and it had said that Porygon can take the type, any different kind of type. But we misread that as Porygon can turn into any Pokemon. So Porygon became the second most powerful Pokemon you can get, and only defeatable potentially by Charizard. Even that was 50-50. But the most fun thing that we did, and I'm going to make it sound like this went on, and this was very serious, but it didn't go as cool as it could have been, but we even had like gym leaders. People who would take up different Pokemon groups and so the other kids who were playing could come over to the gym and try to win a badge from us. And at that point, we just used the energy cards as the badges because we didn't know what the hell these things were for.
Now there is, of course, a very interesting trend that has now been on the rise, and this is, of course, the virtual card game. The biggest one, of course, being Hearthstone. Scrolls being another really good one from the creator of Minecraft. Yes, he did build things that weren't Minecraft. I'm not quite sure if that's a good or a bad thing to be known for Minecraft, because you can't really... where do you go from there?
Yeah, anything at that point would be coming down from the pedestal of the gods.
Yeah, but anyway, there's Scrolls, and I remember there was a Humbled Indie Bundle a while back, a whole bunch of trading card game type things. And this is definitely picking up popularity. We saw League of Legends be popular, and that's when someone said, hey, let's make a sequel to Dota 2. Oh, hey, let's make this, which is actually a faithful Dota. It's sort of a trend, and we're definitely in the middle of a virtual card game trend. So, when you look at both of these, there's advantages and disadvantages to both sides. I think one of the biggest advantages to a traditional trading card game is that you have the cards physically in your hand. You've purchased this package of cards. This package of cards is now yours. You may put it in your pocket. You may not put it in your pocket. You may give it to your friend. You may beat up your friend to take it back.
You punch me in the face for real.
That's good. That's very soft.
Yeah, I guess so.
You may take these cards back from your friends. You may use them to pick out things from your teeth if you want. You may use them as bookmarks in books. In fact, many promotional cards I've gotten from card games I don't play, I use as bookmarks because they're pretty nicely sized and all.
I have a couple of Magic the Gathering cards up on my wall, just as art. I'm not doing anything else with them, so I put them up on the wall.
I have this plaque of all the Wrath of Gods, including the one from the 2013 set. It's like, oh God, it's the end of the world, 2013, the Wrath of Gods! But then they have the virtual one where you're essentially paying to get data.
Yeah.
Which I think is the first turn off, the first, like, wait a second, can we all take this backwards a step and talk about this? You're usually, even if you're using in-game currency, which hopefully you are, because I don't know how many videos there are on YouTube of people spending $50 on Hearthstone cards and not getting anything good, or getting very little good. So, like, it's not worth it, guys. Just use the in-game currency. You're only really getting, again, pieces of data, and for all intents and purposes, if Blizzard decides to cancel your account, or if, I don't know if Mojang has the power to cancel your account for scrolls, then you've lost that digital content.
You've lost the privilege to interpret data in a way that resembles a card game.
Yeah,
it's a few steps away from just having the card game.
Yeah, whereas, again, if you have the physical cards in front of you, here is a possession, you can shove them in a shoebox, forget you have them, and buy a whole bunch of boosters trying to refine some cards you forgot you own. It's actually a possession you own. Now, is this necessarily a good thing or a bad thing? I've met lots of people who played Magic for many years and have shoeboxes after shoeboxes after shoeboxes of cards that they don't really deal with anymore, either because they've rotated out of the current meta, they're not considered part of standard, or in some cases they've been replaced with slightly better versions. I remember there was a card that it was for red, you pay a bunch, you destroy an artifact. Here's another one that for the same cost, you pay a bunch, you destroy an artifact, but you can choose to overcharge it to destroy multiple artifacts. Why would you have that original card in your deck? But, then again, Magic's been around so long that the power creep curve, we keep quoting extra credits here. I keep quoting extra credits, you quote extra credits, we all quote extra credits.
They make so many episodes at a certain point, you can't help it. They're like the Simpsons of short burst, educational, video game related television.
It always annoys me when you reference something and people say, oh, you're referencing The Simpsons? No, The Simpsons referenced it, and I'm also referencing the source material.
Yeah.
But it's kind of all over the place. A lot of cards can become useless, or just, again, there's standard formats. And if you study how the blocks work in Magic the Gathering, you'll see they kind of ramp up the power, and then they kind of curve it back down. And because only certain blocks are allowed in tournaments at any given time, it basically says everything gets better, better, better. Okay, we got a little carried away there. Let's bring it back down. And that overpowered block, you can't bring it to Friday Night Magic anymore. Sorry.
Okay. Now, on the discussion of analog versus digital, I have no problem having a digital version of a game that I am playing for real, because if I want to just practice playing Magic and I don't always have the opportunity to go out or play with somebody, then I can see wanting to take the cards that I own, translate them into a digital version, and then practice with that deck. That to me sounds great because it allows me to be more into this game that I want to be more into. It's that, or I set up 2 decks and try to play myself, which I've done a few times. It's weird when you want to win twice, but you also can lose twice as hard. It's just to play with somebody. Just play with somebody.
You always half win on account of you always half lost.
Yeah. Now, the funny thing about, say, like the booster packing and buying boxes of cards is that in real life, even though it seems random, it's hypothetically random, because up to a certain point there are some tangible facts that we do know for sure within the realm of buying boxes of cards. Like if you get the $90 or $120, depending on what set it is, box of Magic cards, which you and I have actually done. We split on one. I think it was Return to Ravnica or Gatecrash.
It was Avacyn Restored, I think?
No. I bought Avacyn Restored personally.
Okay.
And the fun thing about that one is that I actually wanted to be the guy that pulls Avacyn from the box. I mean, sure, I could have spent less money and just bought Avacyn, but the joy of like going through all of them and that tension, running out of boosters. And guess what? Bitch was in there. I'm sorry, I know that's not the nicest word. That's just how much adrenaline I had at the time. I found she was in the box, and I was like, "That's I got everything I wanted to. I'm so happy." But when you're buying these boxes, you don't know exactly what's going to be in there, but you have your general ideas. There's going to be at least one mythic rare. At least one mythic rare. Probably three. There's probably going to be a planeswalker if this box had planeswalkers in it. You're going to get some good rares, you're going to get some shit rares, you're going to get some pretty good uncommons and not so good uncommons and
Foil
commons. And yeah, a few foil commons because people like being disappointed, I guess. And okay, you're going to get a general sense of it. Now, it's like there's always some way to measure randomness in real life, no matter what. Even if I were to take a six-sided die and throw it, we both accept that it's essentially random, but it can be calculated up to a point where if we consider the trajectory, the probability, we can actually maybe work out what's the most likely number depending on where I throw it. Digital doesn't have that problem. Digital is pure random. It is true chaos, more so than anything that you can achieve in real life. So when you buy 60 booster packs, there is no obligation amongst those 60 booster packs to guarantee you anything.
Well, a couple of points. One, Magic the Gathering, or Wizard of the Coast, has specifically stated with Magic the Gathering, and I think with Duel Masters as well, if Duel Masters is still around, that there is going to be one rare or a foil in every booster pack.
They
like
just say it on the package.
And that is actually true. Part of the randomization process, you can tell. You'll go through the regular cards, and then there'll be like the rule card, and then there'll be the random rare or possibly mythic or possibly just a foil better thing, and then land.
Mm-hmm.
Like those last three cards are just always the same. It's a rule card or whatever, possibly a token card.
Yeah.
And then the rare or the guaranteed rare, and then the land.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm not quite sure Blizzard has really made that same promise.
And the other thing too is that we instinctively we want to trust that this is a fair system, but what if it's not? What if you spend $50, got the $50 worth of packs, and there was some piece of code in there somewhere that's difficult for people to even catch that is going to dictate some a proper due being paid out. Like if he spends $50 on it, we're going to try to get him at least one or two, whatever the Hearthstone equivalent of mythic rares are.
You basically placebo number generation versus random number generation.
I think you mean pseudo number generation.
I thought it was placebo.
It could be either or.
Yeah.
The whole point is
Does pseudo
that.
start with a P?
But yeah, both of them start with the P. But
Okay,
pseudo
so
is silent. So
probably pseudo then.
and it's like hypothetical. It could be random, but that would have to be tampering. That would have to be someone dictating that if they spent this amount of money. Otherwise, randomness will just decide what's going to happen to you.
Yeah, and there have been people who apparently attend so many draft tournaments and do so much research into Magic the Gathering that they can open up boosters, realize what they have someone cast over, realize what they just gave up as part of the drafting process, and be able to calculate what's in the entire box. I've heard of people who have researched the game to that point, and at which point, if that's really what's going on, you can kindly leave, sir. This is not fair to anybody else here.
It's yeah. I mean, I can see your point, but one of the tenets I like to approach is that anything involved in the game is part of the game, and this gets seriously meta. So, I mean, if part of playing Magic the Gathering to you is doing the research and figuring out where to get the best boxes, then I gotta say, all the more power to him. He's the one that's playing it that much harder, so hard that he's even playing it when he's buying cards. Like
So,
that's dedication. It's commendable, even though I understand it's frustrating to someone who is hoping for a fair shake at getting whatever it is he's entitled to.
yeah, it's like any hobby, it's possible to get completely and totally obsessive. So I don't really think they think we should probably try to veer away from that. If we're going to go back to the virtual Hearthstone thing, it has your collection stored for you where you can go, and you can go anywhere. Anytime you log on to any virtual card game, really, onto any computer, in theory, if you can access that card game, you can access your entire collection. You don't have to worry about taking it around with you, but you do need an internet connection, and you do need electricity. So those are two major factors, but again, I think the main defining thing is you don't actually own any of those cards at any point, especially if it's focused on online competitive play. The people running the servers can pretty much just dictate you're kicked off and you've lost all your money, whereas they can never do that to Magic the Gathering. I don't think anyone can okay, people can take away your cards, but that's theft.
Yeah, I mean that's
There's also the big, I think one of the things that Hearthstone and other, like this whole trend even, I know we keep saying Hearthstone, but there are other games out there. It's just I failed to remember all their names.
well, as a general rule, we tend to always refer to the bigger examples, so that way we know more people are on the same page.
Yeah. So one of the advantages to that is that they had the standard release, and they've had two expansions, and then they've had some single player content in the form of the challenge ladders and the raid bosses, which I think is actually kind of fun. Magic played around with that idea at one point, but they never really committed to it, and I feel like they really should have committed to it because that would have been cool.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, they haven't been around for as long, which means that they only really have to deal with the base set, the first expansion, second expansion, and I think there's only two of the trial or raid boss type things. So that's not a lot of cards you have to keep balanced. It's a pretty small pool. Magic, again, has the rules where every couple of years certain blocks are no longer part of the standard rotation
Yeah.
or they're no longer part of tournament rotation. So they can keep the balance of power by simply making sure that it stays somewhat level as time goes on. And that's especially true because Gate, you can't find boosters for Gate anymore. Gate is such an old set. I think it even existed before there was such a thing as blocks. But you can't find it anymore. Like, if I realized that, I would have kept my Gate cards. I had a starter deck of stuff from the Gate set, and I don't think the store realized how much these cards were worth because I just bought it, hey, here's my magical starter deck, yay. But these were some really damn old cards, and you can't find them anymore. There's some things in there which I'm sure have never gotten reprinted, and even if you did get a hold of them, you'd have to do a specific format that allows them. Virtual card games, their cards are around indefinitely. You'll be able to buy those boosters indefinitely because whenever you buy a booster, all that happens is some computer rolls a dice on what cards you're getting.
Yeah, and the cards will remain valid pretty much throughout.
Yeah, and they've even had instances again in Hearthstone where they've had to take a look at some cards and say, "Oh crap, we really didn't think this through." They've had to nerf some stuff. Like I think the big one was there's this one card where every time you summon or play a card with a certain attribute to it, it gets +1 attack and +1 defense. And they just found that you could put a couple of these in your deck, get them out early, build an entire deck around that kind of concept, and all of a sudden these things are ramping up insanely. And it comes down to, look, it doesn't come down to, well, they decided to change the card so it only gets +1 attack and not the +1 defense. So it's like they can basically retroactively nerf things, and all of a sudden an entire deck concept you've constructed is useless because they've gone back and changed cards, which is something they can do anytime they want technically. Whereas Magic has to say, "Crap, we screwed up. Balance wasn't right. Okay, it's fine, people. It's fine. It's a hard to get card. We'll make sure not to synergize with it for the next few blocks."
Yeah, I mean but I also think on more or less, Wizards is pretty good with making sure that the cards that come out aren't going to be. They expect there to be some crazy amounts of power, but I mean once something breaks a game in like 2 turns, I think everyone can agree that they expect a little bit more out of their Magic games. So those cards end up getting banned, and it's easy. It's just be like, yeah, no, that card. It's just not. You just can't use that one.
Yeah, and Magic has encouraged multiple ways of playing the game, which is something you can really only do with a tabletop trading card game. Can't really do virtual. If you do virtual, it's whatever the rules that the gods of the rules has declared that you're going to do.
Yeah.
Whereas the tabletop one, you can decide what you want to do. There is Two-Headed Giant, where you've got 2 people with 1 health pool versus 2 people with 1 health pool. There's Commander, which is very complicated and very weird. And once you actually insert these, and again, draft mode, something a lot of people like playing, which is kind of like regular, but you're getting cards at random. And people like these modes, and more importantly, they add different value to different cards. A card that is completely useless in a normal deck may be very powerful in a commander deck, or might be very useful in a Two-Headed Giant. One of the Magic decks I've built was actually specifically designed with a lot of walls and healing spells and stuff like that, because it was designed for Two-Headed Giant. I'm going to be the shield. I'm going to be the one who's defending my ally, making sure he stays alive, that kind of stuff. And then he's going to be one ramping up power for late game. So cards that otherwise would be useless normally all of a sudden become useful in this mode. In fact, one of the big cheating things is one of the cards in that deck says if you have 40 life, you win the game. Or at the beginning of your turn, you win the game. and in Two-Headed Giant you start off with 30.
Okay, now there's an example of where I would expect that card to be banned, but I can also understand why it wouldn't be, because it feels like an easy win condition. But let's not get too much into why that specific card. But you're right. That's the point is that the cards. Like, the cards themselves have some individual power inherent to them. There's not just about their attack and their toughness. Most of the creatures that you'll put in your deck, you don't just put them there just to physically attack. There's always some augmentation. You're either using them to boost their power somehow, like you're gonna enchant them, or you're gonna sacrifice them, or maybe they are just specifically defenders and they have a high toughness. But no matter what, these things, they don't just come out just to beat the shit out of the other person in most cases without having some extra edge to them. And yeah, what you're saying is that because they have these different mechanics, that mechanic has different impacts depending on what mode you're playing. Honestly, I've said it before and I will say it again, that in terms of accessibility, affordability can go really low or really high in Magic the Gathering. You can spend a lot of money, but you can also get away with not spending too much if you know what you're doing. Overall design and, of course, like production values and the artwork, and Magic the Gathering really is, I think, the best trading card game there is, and maybe one of the best games that you can play in general. Definitely up there with the major classics like chess, or if you want to refer to a video game that's that high, feel free to pick one. I would say I kind of want to give Smash that same nod, because I think it's just growing in popularity more now than it ever has been. But it's a few steps away to me. But Magic the Gathering is also a great example of what happens when your fundamentals are solid. Like when you know what your game is going to be and you know that you're not going to have to revisit this without changing anything. They never thought to add a new color. It was always the same five. It was white, green, blue, red, and black.
Actually, they've had a lot of emphasis on colorless with artifacts.
True.
They've had the snow color, which was a very limited use mechanic. In fact, like Magic the Gathering, they haven't added a new color, obviously, but they have toyed around with a lot of mechanics that have come and gone. Like one of the things
they were willing to bend their rules, which is fine for experimentation, but they didn't break them.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the strengths, and possibly also one of the big problems of Magic the Gathering. There's something in the rule book that says if there is ever a conflict between the rule book and the card, or what the card says, the card wins. And this can lead to a lot of convoluted things where you try to figure out, like, you've got a bunch of counter spells going at each other.
Yeah, this is when it turns into Semantics the Gathering.
Yeah, Semantics the Gathering. You need judges at these events. You always have strange questions. Like, one of the things I've always had is a question. People seem to have strange answers. Okay, let's say I'm being attacked. But I have the power to summon monsters as an instant, which I'm not quite sure how you do that in video games, because it's pretty much saying, oh, I can only do it during this phase. Fuck you. This is an instant. I can play whenever the hell I damn want. I even remember playing the virtual version of Magic the Gathering, and every phase had a timer, even if nothing normally happened that phase, because you had to have the power to pause time and play an instant if you wanted to. Made matches take freaking forever. So you have the instant ability to summon monsters at instant speed. So you've been attacked. I assign defenders. Before damage is calculated, because I can summon monsters, because I can summon monsters at instant speed, I summon a creature with Devour and eat all my defenders. Now here's the big question. Because I did this after I declared defenders, but before damage was calculated, does that mean I now get hit for all the damage, or does that mean that the defenders just got ate before they were hurt?
Right.
And therefore were successfully blocked?
Now, my gut reaction to the answer to this question is I'm imagining that the attackers knew who they were attacking, who the defenders were, and they took the swing, but that's when the instant came place. And the monsters, they were ready to take the swing, or maybe exchange one of their own, and that's when they're all devoured. So then they just hit nothing.
It's kind of like that weird like that one person we played with in the Magic group who insisted that if something has double strike but kills something the first strike, the second strike's supposed to hit you because, oh, have they attacked empty air? Yes, they have, because you sent your guy to attack me. Oh, sorry, you sent your guy to attack me. I sent my guy to attack
We
you.
need to get
You
action
attacked,
figures.
and then, well, are you gonna? You can't keep running up to me and then hit me. You'd have to just mutilate the corpse. Now, if they have trample, obviously it goes through, and now we're getting to a whole bunch of weird mechanics. But that's actually one of the nice things about the virtual card game, in it that they have to keep the mechanics simple. They have to keep it streamlined, because all this stuff has to take care of itself. If you have something which gives other things stealth, but then you give taunt to another one of those creatures, you have to have a computer which can calculate all that and determine how this is all working together. You can't, you can't just push a button that says, call the judge, and someone at Blizzard gets a phone call and now has to explain how the rule set work. It is, the computer has to take care of it. And that in many ways has simplified concepts and simplified ideas. Like, as far as I'm aware, in Hearthstone, there is no targetable graveyard. There's no such thing as casting things from your graveyard, from calling them back from your graveyard, or doing anything with that. And one of the people we used to play with had a very interesting deck where they would mill themselves, which means they would force themselves to discard cards, and then play something that would get bonuses based on how many creatures were in the graveyard. Like, more than half of his creatures were just damn useless. In fact, I think like 3/4 of his creatures were useless. They were never meant to be played. They were meant to be milled into his own graveyard so he can play a card and get a bunch of spiders for every creature in his graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
That was the point, and it's a little bit more difficult again to translate that virtually, because then you need a targetable graveyard. The moment you have that, well, what about flashback spells? What about resummoning from the grave? All that stuff. There is, though, some cool mechanics that can be done as part of the virtual, in it that you can play cards you don't have. Several cards in Hearthstone allow you to copy a random card from your opponent's deck. So all of us, and how would you do that in real life? I mean, the very least, the colored sleeve would reveal where it was, and your opponent would know which card you copied, because he would have to hand it over and would no longer have it himself.
The copy would only work if the card were down on the field.
Yeah, and
it was like, okay, this card is actually this. That, I mean, it's doable, but it doesn't have that same visual acuity that what you're saying Hearthstone has, where Hearthstone is clearly communicating everything.
Yeah, well, in this case, it's not clearly communicating anything, because you've been able to copy one of his cards without him ever knowing which card you copied.
Okay, right, yeah.
And
clearly,
and there's other things that say, you can shuffle these cards into your opponent's deck, and whenever they draw them, something bad happens. Again, if you try that in real life, well, there's a good chance you own different colored sleeves, son. He's gonna know when he's gonna draw that and figure out some way to skip his draw phase. And there's also cards that allow you to randomly summon creatures, and randomly summon means it could be a creature you don't even have as part of your library.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of little fun mechanics there, which you can only really do as part of a virtual environment, and you can't really do as part of a real one. It's kind of like when you do tabletop turn-based strategy versus virtual turn-based strategy. Virtual, you can have invisible units that your opponent doesn't know about. And, in tabletop, well, how exactly do you declare they're an invisible unit? I want you to look away while I move a bunch of tokens around, which may or may not represent units. That's why most stealth units in Warhammer 40k utilize a deep strike rule. So they're not technically stealth, they're just able to appear in various places on the board instantaneously and then attack. And then maybe you can go back to reserve. I think that only works for vehicles. No, but it's not actual stealth. It's just they move on the board.
If I had to figure out a solution to that problem using Warhammer as the example, I know it's a tabletop game, but whatever. I would have to disassociate the player's knowledge from the game's knowledge, and as well as whoever the player is representing, which I assume in this case is a commander figure. So the player is disconnected from the commander is disconnected, or at least somewhat connected to the game. Now I have stealth units. I, as a player, am going to say that these are my stealth units. They are currently invisible. And if anyone were to try to shoot at them, it is very likely that they will miss. Because the game is still operating on its logic, regardless of what the players know, then the game doesn't have to justify them getting shot, even if they're being shot at. Because we can just assume, using abstract, that these characters, maybe they're down on the ground and the other person missed. I mean, people have a hard time shooting things that they can see. It would be nearly impossible for them to hit something that they can't.
But in the case, most conflicts in Warhammer 40k are fought as objective-based battles. So if you as the player could physically observe stealth units moving around the side of the map but knew you couldn't hit them, you would have very little reason not to fortify the living fuck out of whatever the objective is so they can't turn around and snipe it from behind you. Like that would be stupid because even if you weren't allowed to shoot them, it would be impossible to ignore, well, I can't just roll in and take care of all his stuff. That would leave this undefended.
Okay, but if you're going to start using resources on some outpost that you assume is going to be attacked, I mean, that just adds to the mind games. Because, like, well, maybe my guys aren't going to go there. Maybe they're going to go this way instead. Maybe I'm just using these guys to mess with your head.
Maybe you could area effect bombardment that no amount of evasion in the world could get you around.
The fact is, having them there, even if it's not a perfect representation of stealth, still impacts the game in a way that's unique to their presence. So there are ways to do it, it's just not one and the same as how it could be done in a game, or done in a digital game.
I think the deep strike rules are probably just better.
Well, you know, they have more experience with it than I do, so they probably their solutions will ultimately be better.
But yeah, because it's virtual, you can have a little more fun with kind of the logics behind it. All the rules take care of themselves. You don't need a judge. You don't need to argue over, but this shouldn't work like this or like this, because everything in a computer are either ones or zeros. It's true or false. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much how it's going to work, and you can have fun mechanics like I randomly copy a card from your deck and you don't know which card it is. It could be, you know, the thing that lets me destroy one of your creatures, or it could be the coin. Mm-hmm. I copied the coin. I have the why do I have the I don't need the coin.
Now coming back to Magic versus Hearthstone is that in Magic's case, you have your deck, you have the graveyard, you have your exile pile if things started getting exiled.
Oh, and then you have things that can be cast from exile because God knows they love being with us.
Yeah, and of course you got your hand, you get your opponent's hand. Now,
library.
Magic the Gathering kind of expects you to treat this as a metagame pretty much right away because it's telling you that you're a planeswalker and that's a planeswalker and that you are in control of everything that you do here. So it already starts with this idea of an external force having an understanding of what's happening inside. That makes it meta. The deck, part of the game now. The graveyard, part of the game. The exile pile, part of the game. All part of the game. And what's great, because the 5 colors represent different play styles and even ideologies and even player personalities to some level, sometimes it's more about what the planeswalker is doing to affect the game, and sometimes it's about how the planeswalker's creatures are affecting the game. But both become valid, and that's what gives Magic the Gathering so much depth, because it's taken all these things that other card games would treat as just a utility or just a thing that has to exist in order to monitor where cards end up after they're killed, and it has made it into a mechanic, and it is encouraging people to discover new ways to do things. I mean, yes, I'm sure that plenty of combos and plenty of interactions are planned out in advance, especially when they're forming their 3 blocks or their 3 box blocks or whatever, but over the course of 25, 30 years the Magic the Gathering has existed, there are going to be combinations that people are going to discover that no one would have thought of. And you're not going to get that in a digital card game because these things are monitored and can be even calculated to be balanced out. They can figure out what's the most amount of potential damage each class can do each turn, and then have charts, and then make sure that each class can achieve an effect of that same level, maybe the same amount of damage. And they can probably just use an intelligent AI's algorithm to just sort everything out and make sure that everyone has an equal fighting chance. So the only way that any player would have an advantage is actually going to come from purchasing, buying the new cards, because new is always inherently better because it's got less experience with it. You have players who will figure out what to do faster than other players, and they'll be in the lead. And then you will have to have the experience necessary to beat it. And by the time you gain that experience, it's likely that the time will come for new cards to come out. And then the players who can get those cards first will do it again. And it's the same problem that pops up in the arena games too, which is a new character is always going to be the most advantageous because we're going to assume that the game is balanced because that's the goal. They want the game to be balanced. So the only thing that would create an imbalance is the experience level.
Yeah, and that's... I really find this stands for more like League of Legends and Heroes of the Storm and that kind of stuff than it really does Dota 2 because Dota 2 is based on Dota 1 and you can break down everything that was in Dota 1 and then consequently Dota 2 into very solid mechanics. So every time they introduce a new character, it's just they've sorted the mechanics differently. Like Winter Wyvern has a lot of interesting aspects to her, but you can break everything down into unpassable terrain, damage based on health, physical immunity, unable to move, healing, taunt. Like it's all based on existing mechanics. When you look at something like the introduction of Lyric or Rexar to Heroes of the Storm, both of them introduced new mechanics that players weren't used to initially, and thus they appeared very overpowered. Back to my example from last time, Abaddon. Here is a new mechanic, or that is actually the closest thing they've had to a new mechanic in all of Dota 2. All damage is now converted into healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it took everyone by surprise, and that no, this is not actually overpowered, you just need to actually change the tactics you've been using. And well, yeah, card games can be a lot of the same thing. I mean, when we introduced the idea of metalcraft, all of a sudden having focusing on artifacts and using artifact lands, it can now synergize to a different strategy. Using infect was a completely different kind of damage. Please never bring that back. Turn 2 win decks became a lot easier the moment you guys included infect. Please never bring
damage in half.
Never bring that back.
Okay, but to be fair with infect decks, if the infect deck doesn't win in the first returns, it's not going to win, because it at that point you have blockers who can take that damage, and infect has to be done quickly, otherwise you will lose.
Yeah, and
it's like a Zerg rush.
I think also once people understood truly how the Hex Parasite worked, I think that cut down a lot of infect, but the problem is when you, the player, are infected, there's no way to heal from that. That was the biggest problem. So even if they aren't able to fully kill you by turn 3, there's a good chance you've been so injured that they don't really have to apply as much effort to finish you off.
True. It always comes down to, for me, well, you got punched in the face. What are you gonna do about that? To not get punched next time. We always expect to be compensated for the fact that we took damage. When they took damage is a sign that you didn't play something right or you were outplayed. So while I agree with you, the only solution that will ever actually work is to anticipate it and react before it happens. It's the only thing that you can do.
But then, of course, you have the big problem of not being able to recover from it. And you also have decks like one of the ones I have that actually works in the idea of injuring yourself to get out really good plays earlier, which I don't think exists in Hearthstone yet, or any of those. Probably exists in some of the other onlines. Yeah, well, I mean that's another concept of using your health as a resource. There's also, in terms of RNG, if you shuffle the deck, think of all the hundreds of ways people have for shuffling decks. Like, oh no, you have to deal down to piles of 3, and then you have to put the piles of 3 together, and then you have to do this. Whereas virtual card games, RNG bitches.
Yeah, I have to admit, shuffling has always been one of the things that's frustrated me about playing Magic. Is that I want this to be a good match. I want both of us to have a very fair distribution of the lands and the necessary cards to play this properly. And yeah, a lot of games are lost because of a bad shuffle.
Yeah, or you get or even you shuffle well, but then you get either flooded with lands, or you don't get enough lands, or you don't. That is actually one of the advantages most virtual card games have, not just Hearthstone, but Scrolls and all those things, in that they put your resources as a separate thing that isn't directly controlled by whether or not you've drawn it or not.
Now here's a fun idea. I want to see what you think of this. What would you say to playing a game of Magic where both of us actually ordered our decks on purpose, and we decided what card was going to go in what order, and then we play it? It seems like cheating, but we're both doing it, which means that we're both about to come at each other with our hypothetically strongest potential version of that deck.
And that is something we can choose to do if we want to, because we have the physical cards in our hands and can determine what the rules are ourselves. Although I must admit it takes a little of the shock out of it when I know you just drew a land that turn, so I know I can't expect anything new from your spells.
Mm-hmm.
There's also another aspect about, at the very least, if we're going to, since we keep talking about Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone, there is an aspect to Magic the Gathering I just want to point out as a big difference. I purchased a pre-built deck for Magic the Gathering. this is kind of what I do these days. I've kind of given up on the idea of actually making decks, but purchasing pre-built ones, having a collection of those, then when I have my friends over, hey, here's a box full of pre-generated decks. I didn't make them. They're not part of the meta. You want to play? And those are usually the fun ones because they're actually themed after something and they all, have related stories, and those are interesting. But this came with it. It's just this bit of piece of paper. There's another piece of paper that came with it that basically talked about what the rules were for Magic. So if you had no idea how to play Magic, you can pick one of these up and it tells you the rules. This is a nice little poster. On this side, it has tournaments and events and basically boring stuff we don't care about. And on this side, it has a breakdown of all the cards that are located in this deck. What sets they're from, how much they cost, what kind of cards they are.
Really? The cost is on there?
Well, how much they cost mana-wise.
Oh, mana-wise. Okay, I thought
mana-wise.
The
No.
money value. I'm
No.
like, all right, well, if I can't trust Star City, I'll trust you guys.
How many
By the way,
each?
Star City is actually quite good. I recommend it.
And it even comes with this. With the Landslide Charge deck, you'll use large creatures and red spells to relentlessly attack your foe. A touch of blue mana allows you to play 3 color cards from Clans of
Tarkir.
Thank you. Set, as well as some tricky blue spells that'll keep your opponents off balance. The Ferocious mechanic will make one... Okay, so that's a lot of flavor thing. Your ideal opening hand will contain lands that produce different colors of mana and a creature you can cast on the first or second turn. Aggressive creatures like Heirs of the Wilds will let you start attacking quickly, while Elvish Mystic and Golden Hind produce extra mana. This breaks it down. Like, it goes all the way over here. It talks about the sideboard. It talks about, creatures' cost. It talks about at what point you should be playing or not playing. You could have really no idea, or only a basic idea of what you're doing Magic the Gathering. Go to your local store, admittedly spend 20 or so bucks, and get a deck designed by people who work at Wizards of the Coast and whose job it is to design these decks, and a complete breakdown of how to correctly play it. You start playing Hearthstone, you don't have any of the... I think you've got one class unlocked.
Mage.
You have to... Mage, which I like the most. You have to fight all the other NPCs or PCs to unlock those other classes, and you have to level up those classes to get various unique cards unique to them. I remember losing a match as the mage when we did a whole Tavern Brawl event with Geekalicious, and then all of a sudden, hey, you got the mage, you get these cards, which allow you to produce a bunch of, chump blockers. Wow! That did fucking great last match!
I know, it feels like you have to earn the right to have a chance to win. It's like losing is part of the process. And on some level, it's okay to encourage failure, encourage loss, because that's the best way to learn something. But
I don't really feel like that here. I feel like it's a lot of hand-holding. Like, oh, you're not quite a big boy enough to play with this toy, but don't worry, you play with these little toys when you break this. I even had a huge complaint about that in Heroes of the Storm when you first started up. You can't use all the traits and abilities off a particular hero. You have to level up that hero. I think if you get to level 40 in your account, it just automatically unlocks all those for you, so you don't have to deal with that anymore.
One thing I'm going to have to remember to try is make a new account, because it asks you what's your experience level. So if I put...
Doesn't change anything.
It doesn't change anything?
It
does change the video that they show you. It does.
No.
Yeah, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
I watched it, and it started with a different line where it said, like, oh, so you think you're a badass, but then it just went right back to the stuff that the other video did.
Well, I picked because I set my buddy's account up, and he said that we did the third one. It's like, we're experienced, but we're not masters. He's like, all right, well, you know how this works, so let me get to it. And then you tell me the rest of the video was the same?
Yeah.
This game is all about momentum? Is that what he says?
Yeah.
Okay, so
and then it tells about the mercenaries and the objectives and the different maps and all that stuff.
Okay, so either way, they're not expecting you to have played Heroes of the Storm. They're expecting you to have other experience. So they expect that you understand the environment, which is fine, but they're not going to entitle you to any advancements in terms of your account.
Yeah. The point is that if I want to get into Magic the Gathering, which I'm already in, there's plenty of ways to get into it. There's lots of little events. You can go to a game stores. There's pre-generated decks. There's event decks. There's all this easy way to get it. And yes, I have to pay money. But, if I could basically go up to you and say, hey, for your Hearthstone account, pay me $20 and you'll get a perfectly viable deck that you can start taking into ranked. It's not perfect, but, it gives you a nice idea how Synergy works, and it'll get you going. It'll get you some momentum and allow you to earn some gold so you can start getting packs. Would that appeal to you?
Would help.
Yeah. Magic the Gathering offers it left, right, and center with a whole ton of stuff like that. And, the biggest reason why I've put down Hearthstone again, and I think this time permanently, is because I don't have good decks. Why don't I have good decks? Because I don't have a lot of cards to pick from. Why don't I have a lot of cards? Because I can't play fully, I can't play the full game modes or anything like that yet. Why can't you do that? Because I don't have good decks. And, that basically said, fuck it, I'm out of here. Like, I feel like I'm just stuck in this endless loop where I keep losing to the computer because nothing I have synergizes, because I have a couple of free boosters I got from other stuff. Magic the Gathering. Here's a landslide. This doesn't fit the particular strategy you like. Oh, let me show you the other event decks we have.
Yeah. I played Hearthstone. I got through the opening tutorials, played maybe like 10 matches online, and decided I wasn't going to have any of it. And I'm one of those people that can be okay with losing as long as there's some value to it. But sometimes I feel like Hearthstone and even Heroes of the Storm is setting it up so that one person is probably going to win and one person is probably going to lose before the match has started. And the only way to avoid that is to make sure that you're matched up with somebody who has the exact same cards that you do. And winning is an addiction in pretty much anything where you can win, but it's much more potent when you earn something tangible after your win. You and I play a game of Magic the Gathering for fun, or we play it because we're testing out our decks and we're taking it seriously. And the value that we got out of that afterwards is we had a great match, which was a good time. I mean, I played a game with my buddy Rich, and it was the longest game of Magic I ever played. It went on for an hour and a half. Did
you guys actually run out of cards?
No, he ended up winning, but I didn't even care. I was having such a great time, and I got to see my deck being played at that level, at that height of power, and it was great. Now, neither of us earned any gold from it afterwards. Neither of us have anything to bring to the store and say, well, I just wasted my time, but I got some compensation for it. The fact, like, when you lose, even if you walk away with a little something for it, you feel like you wasted it because you weren't focusing on the only thing that should be important, which is the game. People don't exit out of a Dota 2 match and feel like they're entitled to anything. Either they got their win or they didn't, but the point was to play. And that's this thing that really gets me about Blizzard games, is that there always has to be some progress system, some ladder to climb or some curve to go through. And sure, I get why it's there, but it addicts people and it changes the way people approach the game, and it makes me wonder how much fun or how many people would still be considering playing it if the game had enough faith to just do like Dota and just give you everything. Here's all the cards, or you unlock one class at a time. When you unlock a class, you get all the cards with that class. Win 10 games as one class, you can never get another class. Like a really broad, simple progress system that takes much less time to do. Would they still have faith in their players to keep playing? And if they don't, what does that say about the game?
That is an amazing point. I mean, these are obviously free-to-play games. They want to make their money back. Dota, I think, had a lot of faith in the beginning. Like, I'm pretty sure Dota 2 was not making money for the first while. It was probably losing a lot of money. They're making money now. They're definitely making money now. There is no question about that. But when you look at what it was like in the beginning, what they had to work with, I'm pretty sure that was a pretty risky investment for them. If you look at something like, again, Heroes of the Storm, it's, oh, here's a money stir there. In fact, there's even a test server where you can try out heroes that haven't come out yet, or whatever hero that they're working on, and a whole bunch of balance changes, but the test server still has a money store. So if you want to try out the new hero they're beta testing in the server, you have to pay money for her, or you have to still purchase her from the store with the knowledge that she's still in beta, and that may not be what she's like when she's fully released. I'm saying she because that's the current issue.
Lieutenant Morales.
Yeah, like
which, by the way, I want to play. And I just want to point out that, like, I have a good time playing Heroes of the Storm. I don't want to not recommend the game. I quite enjoy it. And I don't recommend Hearthstone because I didn't enjoy it. It has nothing to do with the business model. As a game, it didn't work for me.
But like, even then, that's a little weird because the whole point of her being on the test client is to be tested the living hell out of. You think you should be making her free on the test client if that's the point. But no, you have to pay for her either with in-game currency or money. And we're coming back to the fact that these are free-to-play games. They want to nickel and dime you when they can. Now, I think they've in the case of those two examples, have been very reserved about that. And, okay, yay. If you buy a booster pack on Hearthstone and you don't get the stuff you like, you have a bunch of numbers on the screen. I think that's why Magic the Gathering and physical card games always have a bit of a nice takeaway, because if you buy booster cards, you have physical cards. You can't trade in Hearthstone, you can trade in scrolls and a whole bunch of other stuff. So all of a sudden cards may have different values. A card which may be worthless to you may be worth more to somebody else. But in the end, you always have the physical things in your hand. I actually realized at one point, when I was doing my last job, that when I went to the Shoppers Drug Mart, I think twice, I picked up a Minecraft keychain. And it occurred to me that this Minecraft keychain cost the exact same amount as an item in a virtual game I was thinking about buying.
Mm-hmm.
But the keychain itself didn't really serve much value. I mean, I used one as a makeshift lock on my locker. I didn't think anyone was going to steal it. I just didn't want the door swinging open. So I just used that there. And then the other one I attached to the back of my lanyard because it was just a fun thing to have there. But I spend more on those two keychains, which ultimately don't really serve too much of a purpose, than I was thinking about spending on an item virtually. And that is because the keychains gave me a physical thing in my hand. And I think that's something people really need to keep in mind when you're comparing virtual versions of games that we've known and loved for a long time and their traditional counterparts that we've been working with, is that the physical object will always make people feel a little bit better because you have this thing. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Disney Infinity and Skylanders have taken off, because Amiibos, you buy a physical thing, it has a virtual purpose, but even when that virtual purpose isn't fulfilled, you have this thing in your hand. You have a tangible object you are holding.
You know, I wouldn't hesitate to like go through cards that I have 12 of and cut out some of them and make a collage of all the beautiful artwork, because Magic the Gathering is beautiful. It really is some of the best art that you can get.
One of the nice things about Magic the Gathering compared to most other card games, I'm not quite sure how many other card games do this, is they don't really have an established style. When you make Pokemon cards, the Pokemon always have to look like Pokemon. Yeah, you can have an exaggerated claw effect or some kind of whoosh because they're blowing fire, but they're always that Pokemon, whereas Magic the Gathering, okay, we need a dragon. Have fun, buddy.
Yeah, I have my Oromancer is a stained glass window piece. It's amazing. Like it's I would love to get like a large print of that. In fact, I'm gonna go look into that.
Look on DeviantArt, but there are a whole bunch of different art styles in all over Magic the Gathering because they have no established art style. They have, here's what things approximately look like, and here's all the artists we're hiring. You know, here Scrolls, they kind of standardized it, which was what they wanted to do. That's fine. Heroes of the Storm, or Hearthstone.
Beautiful artwork.
But it's all basically the same. However, like what they did with the original Warcraft game has dictated the art style for every game they have done ever since. And they kind of have to obey that. Everyone, all the girls always have to be this shape, all the guys always have to be this shape, all the creatures always look like this, and all you can really do is maybe have a little fun with the frills.
Mm-hmm.
So and Yu-Gi-Oh! The same thing. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has an established art style. So everything, even though they have different artists, they have to have everything kind of look the same. Digimon, I think, had a little more fun with that because I do remember some creatures looking a lot different than what their counterparts were supposed to, or what their either game or show. So clearly they allowed their artists more freedom for that one. But yeah, it is a nice thing with Magic the Gathering in it that they've gone to professional artists. In some cases, people who even do oil paintings and say, hey, here's this, magnificent vampire creature. We want you to do an oil painting of her.
I mean, they do make the most money because of how big they are. But we do get to see that money is being put back into the game. Sure, they're probably making a killing off of it, and I'm not going to take that away from them, but they can afford the better artwork. They can afford the better production. They can afford to make that the poster. They can afford to make custom dye for releases. They can afford to do all of that because they're making the money to do it.
And hey, those dye are cool. I collect them. Yeah. I don't I don't buy booster packs or anything like that anymore. I buy them spin downs because they're cool.
We're almost out of time. The last thing that I want to say is that if you were like me and you have way more experience playing video games than you did other games, and you want to get into a card game, I'm not going to tell you which one, but highly, highly recommend Magic the Gathering. It is more than a game, it's an institution, it's a format. It is different kinds of games can be played using these cards. It's not like you open the box and you have to play it a certain way. You get to choose how to play it as long as you obey the basic rules of the mana system, the cost system, and the summoning, and even that can be played with. It's the toy box, it's the sandbox, it's the do what you want. There are very restricted tournament styles. There are some very specific ways that are played at the highest level. So if you're competitive, there is an environment waiting for you. And the most important thing is that this is an opportunity to socialize with people that you will probably have something in common with because they're playing a card game like you. And you will miss that. And that to me is one of the most important things about playing a card game is being able to sit across from somebody and maybe make a friend out of it. You know, you and I are friends because of Magic the Gathering. We started playing together, and now it's been 3 years since that point. So, here's proof that these games can actually improve your lives. You just have to live it. You don't just do it on the computer. Don't just do it on the computer. I mean, even Hearthstone has like get-togethers now. People get together and they play, and I'm like, okay, that works. That's
Yeah,
cool.
that is good, and I'm not sure if Scrolls does that. I'm pretty sure the other examples I looked at were mostly based on single player, but
Yeah, play Magic.
that is the great thing about physical card games in general, because you're mentioning there's all these different formats, all the things you can do with Magic the Gathering. You can do that with Pokemon if you want to. You can do that with Yu-Gi-Oh! As long as you and the person you're playing with agrees on altered rules, you can alter the rules. That is both a good thing and a bad thing, because as I said before, there could be complications where if you do this, then this, what happens? But at the same time, you can work it out. You got all the tools you needed on the cards to work it out. Virtual card games, they judge themselves, so you never have to worry about the rules being unclear. But at the same time, it does kind of it limits that creativity. It limits the ability to look at the game as a toy box. I mean, what if you just wanted to kind of do like Hearthstone? Here's your library with your cards. Here's your library with your lands, and every few turns you just flip up a random land and put it on the table. And there, done. Like, I can do that with you if I want to because that's something we talk about and we agree on. And we may even alter our decks slightly to take the most advantage of that policy that we can. Whereas, you look at Scrolls, the rules of Scrolls are the rules of Scrolls. And I would like to say, everyone here, please try out Scrolls. I actually really intended to buy it myself. I've tried it on a friend's system. It combines board game elements with card games, and I think it just deserves more publicity. And you can trade cards with each other.
Cool.
Dear Blizzard, did that ever occur to you? That may be a good idea. But, yeah, I think, well, I never really wanted this to be a competitive versus thing. I didn't want you to put on a Magic the Gathering t-shirt and I put on a Scrolls t-shirt. I wanted that both aspects have advantages and disadvantages, and it's interesting to look at. And I think your toy box comment about the physical one is a very good one, which I completely agree with. And
Thank you.
it's weird because it's kind of like you realize that you have had this thought for a long time, but someone putting it out loud, like, yeah, you are right. And, the virtual one also has fun, putting random things in your opponent's decks, copying a random card from their hand, getting batshit crazy with some of the other mechanics that you can only do because it's a computer. That can also be fun, and there are advantages to both sides, and I do think the best thing Hearthstone ever did was really encourage the whole tavern brawl thing, because, ladies and gentlemen, get out of your damn house, use your tablet or whatever portable system you have, sit next to that person with some delicious tea, and kick their ass with goblins.
And we're out.